So Locke has discussed what it is for an animal or a plant to be the same thing over time. He now turns his attention to the question, what is the difference between a person and the biological kind of entities that we are, namely human beings? He writes, "Since I think I may be confident that whoever should see a creature of his own shape or make, though it had no more reason all its life than a cat or a parrot, would call him still a man." That is to say, for Locke, if you came across someone who's got the biological characteristics of a fellow human being, then even if they don't have anything like reason or rationality, we'd still say they're a human being, even if they lack a mind. And he also writes, "Whoever should hear a cat or a parrot discourse, reason, and even philosophize, would call or think it nothing but a cat or a parrot, and say the one was a dull and irrational man, the other a very intelligent, rational parrot." So for Locke, it's conceivable that there be a human being, that's what he means by man, a human being, man or woman really, who lacks rationality and presumably therefore also lacks a mind. At the same time, he wants to suggest that it's perfectly possible that there be an animal like a parrot who does have rationality, who also has a mind, but that doesn't make that individual into a human being. It's still a parrot. So parrot, human being, cat, etc. are all biological categories that we're given at birth and it seems aren't able to change, and that can stay fixed even if we gain or lose rationality. Well, what is it then for a thing to be a person? Now, we've talked a little bit about synchronic and diachronic questions. Let me apply them to the case of personhood before we get Locke's answer. As you can imagine, a synchronic theory of personal identity tells you what it is for, what conditions have to be met for an entity at a given time to count as a person as opposed to just, for example, a human being or some other biological category like a parrot. Whereas a diachronic question of personal identity is going to answer the question, if you've got a, let's call it a person stage. The person stage right now, speaking to the camera, producing this discussion of personal identity, exists at a certain date at a certain time in October 2015. That's a person stage known as a stage of Mitch Green, the person. And there's another person stage that existed, say, in the year 1970 when I was 7 years old, existing in the Chicago area where I grew up. Now, there was a time slice of me that existed back in 1970, and there's a time slice of me that's sitting in this chair right now. The diachronic question of personal identity is, what is it for that time slice that existed in 1970 to be, so to speak, a stage of the same person as the time slice that is here in front of the camera right now? That is the diachronic question of personal identity. Now, Locke gives an answer to that, but his answer comes in a form that applies to both synchronic and diachronic questions. Let me explain. He writes, "A thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection and can consider itself as itself the same thinking thing in different times and places is for him what it is for a thing to be a person." And I believe that what Locke is getting at is that diachronically, to be a person, it's required that you have to consider yourself as a thinking thing. That is very similar to what Descartes considers when he talks about what answers the question, what kind of thing am I, or what am I, a thing that thinks. In so doing, Locke would say that's the ability to conceive of yourself as a thinking thing. That's what it is to count as a person at a time. What about being the same person over time? Well, he writes, "In this alone consists personal identity, i.e. the sameness of rational being," and he means sameness over time. And as far as this consciousness can be extended backwards to any past action or thought, so far reaches the identity of that person. So his idea is as follows. Insofar as the current person stage in front of you, in front of the camera, is able to remember back to experiences had by the person stage of 1970, and say, for example, I can remember walking with my friends, going to a soccer game in the nearby park. I can remember riding on a train. I can remember going to see Lake Michigan, for example, when I was a kid, 7 years old, in the Chicago area. Insofar as I can, as it were, extend my consciousness back by means of memory to experiences had by the 7-year-old Mitch Green, that's what it is to be one and the same person. These so-called memory links are what make me one and the same person, this current person stage, one and the same person as a previous person stage. So now developing that, we can put the criterion as follows. Where P1 and P2 are person stages, we can say the following. P2, the one that exists later, is one and the same person as P1. just in case, or if and only if, P2 either does or can remember at least one experience had by P1. So even if I'm not remembering right now an experience had by my 7-year-old former self, I still can remember experiences had by that earlier self, that earlier person stage. And Locke will say, that's what it is for me to be one and the same person, so that we can both say, there's Mitch Green, there, and if we were to watch a very, very long movie, there's Mitch Green existing in 1970, and there he is again in 2015.